Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Chris Hutton. Chris, how are you doing?
Hi, Nick. Alex, doing very well, thanks. Apologies to Giovanni, especially for our lateness. We did indeed arrive by Transnet Rail today. Glad we got here
I
in the
think
first place.
I think if we traveled here by Transnet Rail, we probably would never have gotten here in the first place.
Very
And
good
of
point.
course, we're also joined by Alex Weiss. Alex, how are you doing?
Very well, Nick. Coming in tow on our donkey cart along Transnet rails.
Indeed, indeed. Anyway, it's another wonderful day in sunny South Africa, and there are things afoot. So let's start off with more Eskom news. Last night, outgoing CEO of Eskom, Andre de Ruyter, gave quite an annoyed interview. You get the tenor that he's really just sort of fed up with everything. And there are some absolutely choice quotes from this interview. He was asked whether he believes those in the ANC see Eskom as a, quote, feeding trough. And de Ruyter said that the evidence would support, in fact, that the ANC does view it as this. He recounts a story where, quote, I expressed my concern to senior government minister about attempts, in my view, to water down governance around the 8.5 billion US dollars that by and large through Eskom intervention we got at COP26. The response was essentially, quote, you have to be pragmatic. In order to pursue the greater good, you have to enable some people to eat a little bit. So yes, I think corruption is entrenched. He also went on to talk about how the root cause of the governing party's sort of inability to change the way they do things is rooted in the party's obsession with communist ideals from the 70s and 80s. He said, quote, there's a narrative that the state should control everything. Unfortunately, the ghosts of Marx and Lenin haunt the halls of Lutuli House. People are still firmly committed to a 1980s style ideology. They still address one another as comrade. And if you ever just thought that the IRR and the Daily Friend and all of us were loony crackbox banging on about this, here you go, Andre de Ruyter saying exactly the same thing, which is that the influence of very outdated, very defunct ideologies is still extremely strong within the ANC and is a root cause of some of our crises. He also talked a little bit about how, for example, there was micromanagement in the running of Eskom from the Department of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan's department, at least until the supposed cabinet reshuffle that's supposed to come at the end of this month. The world's longest awaited cabinet reshuffle, but I digress. And there were several other. It's a great interview. You should go and look for it. It's very recent. It's just got some great stuff where de Ruyter just doesn't mince words at all about the problems facing Eskom. But there's been an interesting development in Eskom today, which is that they have, I think, released a statement talking about how they are increasing the amount of energy shed, and yet we're still on stage 6. And so, Chris, could you explain the rumors of stealth stage 7 to us?
Right, so here we get the issue of, in trying to avert grid collapse, Eskom trying to ensure that the demand doesn't override or sort of overpower, if you'll excuse the pun, the amount of supply that they can provide at any given time. So the dispatchable energy that they have ready to go. So according to Eskom spokesperson Sikunati Manchancha, it's usually every evening actually, he shares the latest supply and demand figures from the Eskom side on his Twitter account. It's obviously publicly available if anyone wants to follow him and sort of check the numbers and read through it. But the latest numbers that he shared yesterday evening, so Tuesday evening, indicated that South Africa is at the moment shedding more than 7,000 megawatts. And the definition of stage 6, according to Eskom's own guidelines, is 6,000 megawatts. So definitely an element here, I think, of maybe playing around with words. If you look at the basic figures, and Sikunati, I think, to give him some credit, has a good track record of providing the numbers that he gets them as is. So from his own side, he won't try and massage them. Others might try to, but I do trust his sort of reporting and that kind of thing. So it looks like we're on at least stage 7. I think we're likely heading towards stage 8 very soon, just given the breakdowns that we saw over the past weekend at many of the coal-fired power stations, and Eskom just can't keep up with the maintenance. If you also just look at their available generation capacity, that stood at 22,000 megawatts on Monday evening and 23,000 on Tuesday evening, but demand has increased to about 29,000. So huge discrepancies there. I think a big issue for Eskom, and they, despite the fact that you might have still very good people in isolation at some of the power stations, good engineers who are like trying to put out fires, it's all just catching up with them very quickly now. And it's sort of this idea of at first gradually and then all of a sudden. So I'm not trying to say that there will be grid collapse or anything of that sort, but sort of from the Center for Risk Analysis perspective, the only sort of advice, as it were, is don't be caught off guard by that kind of thing if it does happen, because things could snowball to the effect that it's going to catch you.
We've already seen a snowball, right? 2 years ago, we were kind of mostly around stage 2, and with breaks of load shedding, and then we kind of moved up to a permanent stage 4, and now we're sitting at sort of stage 4 between stage 6 intermittently, and maybe even a stealth stage 7. So this is what it feels like to live inside the snowball. This is what it looks like.
Nick,
Alex,
sorry, if I can just add quickly.
Go ahead.
Just your point on what the Director said in that interview. So maybe for some people who disagree with us on some analysis and talking about the National Democratic Revolution, all this stuff, saying, oh, you focus too much on theory and ideology and whatever. The ideology informs the policies that are implemented. So we're seeing that consequence now, like daily, with the issues at Eskom. So those ideas that they hold dear to their hearts at Lutuli House and other power structures of the ANC, you're seeing the concrete effect of that. These things don't come from nowhere. There is a root sort of origin to them, and this is their necessary consequence. This is the necessary consequence of wanting to centrally control an economy, to trying to have one sole provider of electricity generation and distribution.
So, Alex, I was trying to explain to a very non-political friend yesterday kind of why Eskom isn't being fixed, and about the kind of very bizarre sort of psychological box that the ruling party seems to put itself into. And that's why I was very heartened a little bit by this interview with Derator, because I think it backed up a lot of the things that I was suggesting to this person. We're contained within this box of ideology in which there is no room for any deviation from the plan. And anyone who deviates too much from the plan must be attacked as a counter-revolutionary, as a racist, as an unpatriotic person. The ANC views every problem as a problem of sabotage or deviance by malevolent forces, and the only solution to such problems is to strengthen central control. But with Eskom, they've run into a problem of you can't centralize control anymore. They control everything. The Eskom is totally within the power of the ANC, and so they just sort of keep trying to smash the square peg of further centralization into the whole of the Eskom problem, and it doesn't fit. It just doesn't make it better. It's a fascinating psychological process to see, but the consequences, as we can see around us, are quite devastating. What do you make of all this? What do you make of the stealth stage 7?
Yeah, I think it's a very useful case study to elaborate on the effect of ideology, because I understand completely the type of conversation that you've had, and I think it shows and the advantage of this interview with Derator is to say that if for ordinary people in the public to hear it from the horse's mouth, not the dead one that he's trying to kick start, but a
lot of horse metaphors today.
Yeah, oh goodness. But I think the point is that it's a good case study of the impact of ideology, and including little tidbits like people have to eat here and there. It's all part of the machinations of the ideology. It's a patronage network. It's in the ANC's own interest to enforce this patronage network, and this is the result of a very successful patronage network playing out to the detriment of service delivery in the form of electricity provision. So in a way, and I think to the credit of the journalist who hosted the interview, it's very refreshing to see such an honest interview. We don't see this often, and I think this might be a big Overton window shift that, we can interview public figures and speak very openly about the source of the problem and the impact of ideology in very simple terms. So, in a way, it's quite a useful case study that makes its own point.
Just in response to Andrew in the comments, whether Dorata has reported the suspected criminal activities, I believe he has to a degree, but you can still see that Dorata is holding back a little bit here in the fact that, for example, this government official he claims told him to basically overlook some corruption. He doesn't name who they are. And I feel like once he goes, he really should name specifically who that was, because this is an awful problem, I think, in our politics. We kind of dance around some of the issues. You see this in a lot of sort of mainstream analysis on TV. The problem is very obviously ANC ideology, political patronage networks, and failure to govern. And yet we kind of get this sort of soft soap talk about, well, politicians this or government this, and it's all just a little bit vague without anyone really addressing things directly. Chris, any final thoughts on this before we move
on? Just to say, obviously, credit to Dorata for this, but a while, I think it was last at some point in his push for advocating for renewable energy, he, to sort of summarize it or paraphrase it, he said you can't steal the sun and the wind. So that's why one of his arguments in favor of renewables. And I hope he's now come to this realization where if you've got, for example, this party in charge of procurement and localization policies, all that sort of thing, you can steal the sun and the wind because you get to decide who gets the permits, who gets the licenses, who gets the contracts, where it gets built, etc., etc. So not so much about the form of energy. We can debate that. I mean, I think there's quite a clear case to be made for some sources over others. Let the market compete and all that sort of thing. But we're by no means out of the woods yet. If we now get massive new sources of renewable energy, that doesn't mean that the distribution and generation networks will now be free of corruption and patronage and all that sort of thing.
And just to very quickly go over the solutions to the Eskom problem, they are get rid of preferential racial procurement, stuff like BEE. Also, in terms of the hiring and firing of staff, don't fire people because of their race. Hire whoever is the most appropriate person for the job. Decentralize the system. We've seen there are places in South Africa, like in the Mafube municipality around Frankfurt in the Free State, where the distribution grid is privatized, essentially. Not quite privatized, but run by a private company. That has benefits. Decentralize the system as much as possible. Do what government is already committed to doing, which is breaking up the distribution, transmission, and generation parts of Eskom. Another reform that was much promised and seems to have been all set up, ready to go, and just government refuses to act on it. And actually, also, lastly, just target people for non-performance. If people are corrupt, fire them. If people don't do their jobs, fire them. Don't protect them because of their political connections.
Nick, can I just add one last little bit? I think just on the point of bringing it all together with ideology and the power vested in the state and stuff, is just to say that reform. Every episode we can say what the solutions are, and everyone has some idea of what they are, but it's within the ideology and the ensuring the system of patronage system maintains itself. That reform can't come within that mode of thinking, and that's why political reform overall is so important. And I think that's something for a lot of people to consider leading up to 2024.
Right. And Alex, what's the website for the Pledge to Vote campaign again?
pledgetovote.co.za. Make the commitment to vote and state your reason why. Getting rid of load shedding is an option, as is sort of caring about the future of South Africa, which, go hand in hand, of course.
Indeed. All right, so let's move on to our next topic, talking about sort of important national institutions as our democracy. The seat of our democracy, our parliament, burned down a while ago. This is a fact that people often seem to forget, because I think parliament has sort of been so discredited by a lot of the antics that go on in it. And yet it remains a vital institution if the country is ever to recover from the situation it is currently in. Good legislation has to be passed, proper oversight has to be done, and parliamentarians need to be held accountable and to hold government departments accountable. So it's not great that our parliament burnt down, is unusable, and as a result, there is a lot of sort of emergency provisions that have had to be used for a while. I know some MPs, and they say that it's much more difficult to kind of get answers out of government, to hold people to account when you're on a Zoom meeting, because you can kind of be muted, or you can be ignored, or the chairman has more control over the meeting. So it's probably imperative, actually, for the good governance of the country that we do move back into a situation where we have a proper House of Parliament that people can perform the business of Parliament in. But it looks like we're going to have to wait quite a while. According to a report, reconstruction of Parliament is only going to be finished by 2025 at the earliest, which will mean that it would have been non-functional for 3 years. The person who is accused of burning down Parliament, Sandile Mafe, is still awaiting trial, even though he was arrested for burning down the Parliament a while ago. And that the cost of reconstructing Parliament is going to be around 2 billion rand. Now, I don't know whether that's a good figure or a bad figure, but it feels to me like it could be worse. However, I suspect that this will not be the final figure based off of the history of government construction projects over the past few years. Alex, your thoughts on the sort of weird state of how Parliament kind of burnt down and no one really cared that much?
Yeah, I actually had the thought in January, because it was kind of the anniversary of the burning down, and there was just nothing, and we just carry on and go to the city hall in Cape Town and continue. But I guess I understand including some upgrades to the ICT infrastructure to the building. Why not while you're there? I'm just getting some serious digital vibes, so I'm just wary of that.
Whenever we hear government talk about digital futures and digital this, it almost always comes with some sort of disaster in the offing.
No, absolutely. But I think it's important that we get Parliament back as soon as possible. It's a very, amongst other things, it's a very pretty building. It's a landmark for the country. So let's get people back to the building where they belong, so that we can hold our politicians accountable properly and MPs can do their job. I think any business that went into the pandemic and had to resort to going online will know it takes a lot of time to actually even just get the whole system up and running. And I somehow doubt that there was any adequate preparation, as it was even an emergency response to the burning down of Parliament, to even go hybrid as well on top of COVID. So the sooner the better. The cost is to just Hotspur deals. So
on that final point, I've witnessed a couple of these sort of hybrid, half online and half in the Cape Town Town Hall, City Hall, parliamentary sessions. And it is the most hilarious, but also completely dysfunctional kind of thing. When there's a big fight, everyone will, in the middle of someone else talking, just like deactivate their mics. MPs often don't have the camera set up right, so it's like looking up their nose or like at their chin. You have people like screaming randomly. You can't operate like that. Chris, your thoughts?
I think your hedged cynicism is very apt around the costs. I don't think we should be surprised when that figure inflates massively over the next 10 years. Maybe they'll finish the reconstruction or rebuilding before they finish Kusile and Medupi. I wonder if someone should have a bet on when each of those projects, which one will be finished first. Again, you've just got sort of perverse incentives and systems in place. So it favors inefficient spending, bloated spending, because it has to go to my contacts, my networks, those who I've either bought in or have bought me into the system and who I need to repay in some way. I think this also is indicative of maybe the wider NEC of the ANC, where you've got all these interest groups, they've all got dirt on each other. They're all equally important individuals as well, which means at the end of the day, you have to try and keep everyone sort of unified to make sure that everyone gets a piece of the pie, as it were. Just I think a sad sort of symbolic indication of the current state of the nation. Obviously apt, given that we had the State of the Nation address 2 weeks ago.
All right, let's very quickly move on to the next topic. I don't think we're going to dwell too much on this one because it's a familiar argument that we have kind of all the time, which is that the minimum wage has been increased in the agricultural sector, and this has sparked some complaints by Agri-SA. So the agricultural sector is looking at a government-enforced minimum wage of an increase of 9.6%. Agri-SA says that any increase in costs will further strain already hard-pressed farmers, as the sector battles to contain the costs associated with load shedding, crumbling infrastructure, and high input costs. This increase will further undermine food security and put much-needed jobs on the line. The Agri-SA spokesperson went on to say that farmers were better able to absorb the minimum wage increases of the past few years, but that the agricultural industry is not facing the same tailwinds that it was. In fact, now the environment looks a lot rougher. They want a consumer price inflation minus 2% increase to the national minimum wage, as opposed to the sort of almost twice inflation minimum wage. So, Chris, let me start with you. You know, agricultural workers don't get paid a lot of money. I think it's 25.5 Rand an hour for some of the work they do. So you can see why people want to increase the minimum wage, why government would want to do that. But at the same time, there are some serious drawbacks to the minimum wage, especially when it's increased by this much.
Yeah, so I think sort of two things at play here. If you very justifiably want farm workers to be paid more, I think the starting point, as with most industries, if not all, should be what are the regulations and policy barriers that increase business operating costs, that make it more difficult for businesses to employ more people, to generate more profit, to ensure that their spending is sort of better, instead of wasting time on, millions of pages of compliance or having to install generators to deal with load shedding, all those sort of added costs that, because of state failure and state policies and regulations, now make it more difficult for farmers to operate. So I see that as the sort of first point. If you really do care about farm workers being paid more, then make it easier for farmers to operate. And then just secondly, the downstream effects of this on consumers. So as of January, I believe the inflation on food and non-alcoholic beverages was 13.6% from a year before. So a big driving force in higher inflation at this point in time. You had a little bit of mitigation in terms of lower fuel prices. That was thanks to low oil prices. But if that swings around again, then you're going to see an increase. So you've got this impact on consumers where their money isn't going as far as it used to, a devaluation of the currency, again, thanks to load shedding, and then food inflation, meaning they can't sort of get the sustenance that they would before, which in turn feeds frustration with the status quo, possible unrest, all that sort of thing, and impact on the business operating environment. So once you start with these costs increasing exponentially, then you, I think, really add to the possibility of some sort of, not revolution necessarily, but like serious societal instability and frustrations with how things are going. And I mean, I can understand the frustration from agriculture side, from Agri-SA. I think there's also an argument to be made for the bodies like that to really, in different ways, put more pressure on government, or, not just wait for government anymore, but start really going off grid and that sort of thing, because you can't expect this thing to be turned around overnight.
Alex, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, just one point to make is colleague Terence Corrigan wrote a very good piece about the impact of load shedding on the agricultural sector, which is on the dailyfriend.co.za website, which I'd encourage viewers to read. And Terence makes the point of how much pressure the agricultural industry is under. And I think it's in that piece where he mentions that agricultural experts reckon that as a result of load shedding and all the other issues that Chris mentioned, food inflation prices will probably go up to about 20%. And so now we've got the government coming in with the helicoptering in with the sort of populist idea of raising minimum wage that these workers are going to have to use to buffer the increase in food inflation, to pay for groceries. And it's just going to be a vicious cycle. And so I think, again, back to the ideological underpinnings, we need to understand that these policies, every policy is interconnected. And if it's housed in a sort of socialist, communist framework, it's bound to, the contradictions will eat itself up, unfortunately.
Right, and if you're not careful, you get what happened in Venezuela, where the government basically every week had to raise the minimum wage because inflation is so high. So the better you can avoid that, the more you can avoid that, the better. Right, so let's move on to our last topic for today, and we decided we need to talk about the humble pothole, a companion to many who drive South Africa's roads. They have cost an enormous amount of money. They slow down people. And the sort of thing that caught Alex's eye was this claim by the premier of the Northwest Province, Bushi Mape, who said that when I travel from Mahikeng to Klerksdorp, when I travel from Mahikeng to Schweizer, I do not hit any pothole. He said there are roads in the country that are riddled with potholes, but there are others that are in perfect condition. This drove quite a lot of outrage on social media, as one might expect, and from opposition parties. Someone on social media who was quoted the news said, "Last time I drove from Mahikeng to Klerksdorp, the road was unbearable, and that was just a while ago. The journey from Delareyville to Klerksdorp takes 45 minutes, but because of the potholes, takes more than an hour now." The EFF's provincial leader said that you cannot drive from Mahikeng to Rustenburg without hitting any potholes. I was in Rustenburg last Saturday, and when I drove from there to Lichtenburg, I hit a pothole on one of my cars. Mags was damaged beyond repair. And the DA MP, Leon Schreiber, said in response to this that the Premier of the Northwest must have a very good driver to be able to dodge all of the potholes on the roads. Alex, your thoughts on the humble pothole?
Yeah, I think what I love about it is how much passion it elicits from the public, because we can see it for ourselves, we experience it. I remember driving from Mashishing, Leidenburg to Dahlstrom a couple of years ago, and they demarcated all the potholes that were, I think, to the credit of those in charge, they were demarcated to be fixed. But I think there were over 100 potholes that were marked. So for any parents going on road trips, if you, instead of playing I Spy, you can play Count the Pothole with your kids or something like that. But I think it's just, I think the point that it illustrated to me is that the government's very much on the back foot, and it's an indicator of so many other issues. When you start defending, oh no, the potholes aren't that bad, or I went on this stretch of road where there were no potholes, you've lost the game. And I think at the end of this week or sometime soon, the Formula E is being hosted in Cape Town, and on the other hand, we dodging potholes on our commutes to work. So yeah, it's a crying shame it's a very shameful icon for the government and to the detriment of the public.
Chris, in 20 seconds, anything to add?
Just that I'm not sure why the EFF is particularly concerned. I mean, that's not being able to use the road sounds like a proper socialist utopia to me. So,
Alex, you wanted to share something from a South African comedian about the humble South African pothole.
So this clip went viral recently by a comedian called Temba Robbins. So I just thought we'll share it before we close out for the show. Let me just bring it up.
Why, hello there, and welcome to the Urban Safari. Standing behind me is a family of South African potholes. Scientifically named the Replacis metiasis every weekus. Extinct only in the Western Cape, the South African pothole is far superior to other species found elsewhere in the world, as it has two secret weapons. It has learnt to take advantage of a crumbling infrastructure and lazy repair work. This, coupled with the fact that it is asexual, means a single pothole can reproduce faster than two horny rabbits in a field full of horny rabbits. With no natural predators, a strong, independent pothole like this is free to prey on small to medium-sized vehicles, such as the I-20, Fiestas, and Polos, with their springs cut. Although the debate continues as to how the pothole got its name, whether it's because you can put a pot in it, or because it's going to cost you a pot of gold every time you replace your tires, one thing remains true. Whilst humanity wages war on itself for power and dominance, our path to success is eroding rather quickly, one horny asexual pothole at a time.
With this truly great talent in this country. Anyway, with that, I think we'll call it to a close. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.